September 14th, 1945. Fort Stockton, Texas. The concrete floor was cold beneath her feet, but Greta Muller didn't move. She stood perfectly still in the darkest corner of the converted warehouse, one hand pressed flat against the rough wall, the other clutching the loose fabric of her oversized uniform shirt. Her belly had grown too large to hide much longer. 6 months now, maybe closer to 7. She had lost track of the exact count somewhere between the surrender in Italy and the long ship journey across the Atlantic. If the Americans discovered her secret, she was certain they would take her baby. The sound of boots echoed down the hallway outside, heavy, deliberate steps that made the wooden floorboards creak with each footfall. Greta held her breath, pressing herself deeper into the shadows. The footsteps passed, the door didn't open. She exhaled slowly, feeling the baby shift inside her, a small flutter of movement that reminded her why she had to stay hidden, why she had to survive. In the darkness, she could still see Franz's face, his smile the last time she had seen him confident and bright before he left for Normandy. Before the telegram arrived 3 months later, with words that shattered everything. Fallen in combat, no body recovered. Just gone, as if he had never existed at all except in her memory and in the child growing inside her. The war had ended on a Tuesday, May 8th, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. Greta had been working in a field hospital outside Naples when the news came. Hitler was dead. Germany had surrendered. The war that was supposed to last 1,000 years had collapsed in 12. The nurses and orderlies gathered in the courtyard, faces blank with shock. No one cheered. No one cried. They simply stood there trying to comprehend what it meant to be on the losing side of history. The Americans arrived 2 days later. Greta had expected brutality. The propaganda had been relentless for years. Americans were monsters, they said, savages who would rape and murder without mercy. The stories circulated through the hospital in terrified whispers. What they would do to German women, how they would laugh while they did it, how capture meant a fate worse than death. But when the American soldiers finally came through the hospital doors, they didn't come with weapons drawn. They came with medical supplies and stretchers. They treated the wounded German soldiers with the same care they gave their own. And when they processed the women for transport to prisoner of war camps, they were professional, efficient, almost gentle. The disconnect was staggering. Greta had stood in line with the other nurses waiting to be cataloged and assigned. She wore her uniform shirt untucked, hoping the loose fabric would disguise what was becoming impossible to hide. The soldier who took her information was young, maybe 22, with a sunburned face and tired eyes. He asked her name, her age, her position. He wrote everything down in careful block letters and handed her a stamped card without ever really looking at her face. She had made it through. The first test passed. They shipped the women across the Atlantic in the hold of a converted cargo vessel. 3 weeks of rolling seas and stale air and the constant fear that someone would notice. But the other prisoners were too wrapped up in their own misery to pay attention. They were all just trying to survive the journey to reach whatever uncertain future waited for them on the other side of the ocean. When they finally arrived in Texas, the heat hit like a physical force. Greta had never experienced anything like it. Germany was cold even in summer. Italy had been warm, but this was different. This was a dry, relentless heat that seemed to pull the moisture from your skin and make the air shimmer above the ground. Fort Stockton sat in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by endless stretches of scrubland and distant mountains that looked like purple shadows on the horizon. The camp itself was a converted school, a low, sprawling building with broken windows and peeling paint. But inside it was surprisingly clean. The Americans had swept the floors and set up rows of thin mattresses on metal frames. They had hung sheets between the sleeping areas to create the illusion of privacy. It was more comfortable than any place Greta had lived in the past 2 years. That first night, she lay on her assigned mattress and stared at the ceiling, feeling the baby move inside her. The other women whispered in the darkness, their voices carrying through the thin fabric walls. Some cried, others prayed. A few speculated about what would happen to them next. Would they be sent back to Germany? Would they be put on trial? Would they ever see their families again? Greta said nothing. She placed both hands on her belly and made a silent promise to the child inside her. Whatever happened, she would find a way to protect her baby, even if it cost her everything. The second morning brought something none of them expected. Breakfast. The American guards opened the doors to the mess hall at 7 in the morning sharp. The women filed in uncertain and wary, expecting watery soup or stale bread. Instead, they found long tables set with metal trays, real trays divided into sections. And standing behind a serving counter, American soldiers with ladles and serving spoons. The first woman in line held out her tray. The soldier smiled, actually smiled, and scooped a portion of scrambled eggs onto the metal surface. Then bacon, then toast, then a cup of coffee. The woman stared at her tray as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Anna Schmidt stood 3 places behind Greta in the line. She was 23, thin and sharp-eyed with dark blonde hair, pulled back in a practical knot. She had worked as a telephone operator in Munich before being assigned to the communications unit in Italy. She had survived the collapse of the Gothic Line in the chaotic retreat north. She had survived the surrender in the processing camps. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. When her turn came, she held out her tray with trembling hands. The American soldier, a corporal with red hair and freckles, loaded her tray with food. More food than she had seen in a single meal in over a year. The eggs were still steaming. The bacon was crisp and dark. The toast was golden brown with a pat of butter melting on top. Anna found a seat at one of the long tables and sat down slowly. Around her, the other women were doing the same, all of them staring at their trays with identical expressions of disbelief. Greta sat across from Anna. She picked up her fork, lifted a bite of scrambled eggs to her mouth, and tasted it. The flavor exploded across her tongue. Salt and butter and something rich and satisfying that she had almost forgotten existed. She took another bite, then another. And then, to her horror, she felt tears beginning to slip down her cheeks. She wasn't alone. All around the mess hall, women were crying as they ate. Some tried to hide it, ducking their heads and wiping their eyes quickly. Others didn't bother. They simply sat there with tears streaming down their faces, eating breakfast like it was the most precious thing they had ever been given. Anna set down her fork and looked at Greta. Their eyes met across the table. In that moment, without speaking a word, they understood each other perfectly. This wasn't supposed to happen. The enemy wasn't supposed to be kind. The enemy wasn't supposed to feed them better than their own government had in the final months of the war. And yet here they were, warm, fed, alive. The guilt was crushing. That afternoon they had medical examinations. The announcement came during lunch, delivered in heavily accented German by an American officer who had clearly learned the language from a textbook. All women would be examined by a medic. It was mandatory, no exceptions. The fear that rippled through the mess hall was almost tangible. The women exchanged glances, their earlier relief evaporating. Medical examinations meant being touched, being vulnerable, being alone with American soldiers who might, despite the morning's kindness, still reveal themselves to be exactly what the propaganda had warned about. Anna felt her heart begin to hammer in her chest as she joined the line forming outside the makeshift clinic. She watched as women ahead of her disappeared through the door and emerged a few minutes later, looking shaken but unharmed. Still, her hands were sweating when her turn finally came. The clinic had been set up in what must have once been the school's administrative office. A desk was pushed against one wall. Medical equipment sat on metal trays atop a folding table, and standing beside it, checking something on a clipboard, was an American medic. He looked up when Anna entered. Sergeant Thomas Mitchell was 25 years old, though the war had aged him in ways that didn't show on his face. He had sandy brown hair cut military short and blue-gray eyes that carried a weight of exhaustion most people wouldn't notice unless they looked closely. He wore standard army fatigues with a red cross stitched on his sleeve and sergeant's stripes on his shoulders. When he saw Anna standing frozen just inside the door, he set down his clipboard and smiled. It was a small smile, gentle and reassuring. The kind of expression that suggested he understood exactly how frightening this moment must be. He gestured to the chair beside the examination table and said something in English that Anna didn't fully understand. But his tone was clear. "Sit down. It's okay." Anna sat. Her back was rigid, her hands clenched together in her lap. She kept her eyes fixed on a spot on the far wall, determined not to look at him directly. Tom moved slowly, telegraphing every action before he made it. He picked up a stethoscope and held it up so she could see it. Then he made a listening gesture, touching his ear. He was asking permission to check her breathing. Anna nodded barely, and Tom placed the stethoscope gently against her back through her shirt. The metal was cold. She flinched and he immediately pulled back, waiting until she settled before trying again. This time she stayed still, feeling the pressure of the stethoscope as he listened to her lungs in several different spots. Next came the throat examination. He gestured again, opening his own mouth to show what he needed. Anna opened her mouth and Tom looked quickly, efficiently, with a small flashlight. Then he checked her eyes, shining the light briefly in each one. The entire examination took less than 5 minutes. When it was finished, Tom wrote something on a card and handed it to her. Her name was written across the top in neat capital letters, Anna Schmidt. Below it a stamp that read, cleared, and a date. Then Tom did something that stopped Anna's heart. He bowed. Not a full formal bow, not the deep ceremonial gesture of her own culture, but a bow nonetheless. A slight inclination of his head and shoulders, a gesture of respect, that said without words that he saw her as a human being worthy of dignity. Anna stood there for a moment, the card clutched in her hand, unable to process what had just happened. Then she managed a small nod in return and walked quickly out of the room before the tears that were suddenly threatening could actually fall. Outside, the other women crowded around her immediately. What happened? Did he hurt you? What did he do? Anna shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. Nothing. He did nothing. He was kind. The word felt strange in her mouth. Kind. Der Feind war nicht grausam. The enemy was not cruel. That afternoon, as the women gathered in the converted warehouse that served as their barracks, they spoke in low voices about what had happened, about the food, about the examinations, about the American medic who bowed. Some insisted it was a trick, a way to make them lower their guard before the real brutality began. Others weren't so sure. Maybe they whispered, maybe the propaganda had been wrong. Maybe the Americans weren't monsters after all. Greta listened to the conversations from her mattress in the corner, one hand resting on her belly. She wanted to believe the optimists. She wanted to think that she and her baby might be safe here. But fear was a hard thing to shake, and trust was even harder to build. 3 days later, everything changed. A new group of prisoners arrived on a Thursday afternoon. 20 women transferred from a camp in Maryland. They had been working in a military hospital there, captured when American forces liberated Rome. Now they were being consolidated here in Texas, where the climate was better suited for long-term detention and the facilities could handle larger numbers. Anna was assigned to help process the new arrivals. She stood at a table in the main hall, checking names against a master list and assigning bunk locations. The work was simple, methodical, a welcome distraction from the uncertainty that colored every hour of camp life. Most of the new women looked like Anna herself had looked 3 days earlier. Exhausted, frightened, braced for the worst. But one stood out. She was young, maybe 20, with long brown hair, tied back in a simple knot at the base of her neck. She wore the same standard-issue uniform as everyone else, but hers seemed somehow wrong. The shirt hung oddly loose and untucked, bunching at her waist. When she walked, she moved carefully, as if each step required conscious thought, as if she was protecting something. Anna's trained eyes caught it immediately. The way the woman kept one hand near her stomach. The way she angled her body when she sat down to fill out the intake paperwork. The way she arranged the fabric of her shirt, just so, making sure it draped rather than clung. Anna said nothing. She processed the woman's paperwork efficiently, wrote down her bunk assignment, and sent her along to collect bedding. But she watched, and she waited. That night, Anna couldn't sleep. The heat was oppressive even after the sun went down, and the warehouse never quite cooled off. She lay on her mattress, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of 200 women trying to find comfort on thin beds in a foreign land. Around 2 in the morning, she heard movement, quiet, cautious footsteps padding across the concrete floor. Anna turned her head and saw a slim figure moving through the shadows toward the latrine area at the far end of the building. It was the new woman, Greta, according to her intake form. Greta Mueller, 20 years old, from Berlin. Anna waited until Greta had been gone for several minutes, then rose silently from her own mattress. She moved through the darkness with practiced ease, avoiding the sleeping forms of her fellow prisoners, following the sound of running water from the washroom. The latrine area was dimly lit by a single bulb that hung from the ceiling on a cord. In that weak light, Anna saw Greta standing at one of the sinks, her uniform shirt pulled up, her hands resting on a belly that was unmistakably, undeniably pregnant. Greta must have heard Anna's footsteps because she spun around, her eyes going wide with terror. Her hands flew to pull her shirt down, but it was too late. Anna had already seen everything. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. They simply stared at each other across the concrete floor, the silence heavy with implications that could shatter lives. Finally, Anna took a step forward. She kept her voice low, barely above a whisper, conscious of how sound carried in the empty space. How far along Greta's face crumpled. Her shoulders began to shake. She looked like she wanted to run to disappear, but there was nowhere to go. She was trapped between the truth and a lie that had just been exposed. 6 months, she whispered back in German, her voice breaking. Maybe 7. I'm not certain. Anna felt her chest tighten. 6 months. Maybe 7. That meant the baby would come soon. In the middle of winter, in a prisoner of war camp surrounded by strangers and enemies. Who was the father? The question came out more gently than Anna had intended. She watched as Greta's face transformed, grief washing over her features like a wave. Franz, Greta said. His name was Franz Keller. He was a soldier. We were engaged. He was killed in Normandy last June. She paused, swallowing hard. We weren't married. My family, if they knew, they would never forgive me. And if the Americans find out, her voice dropped to almost nothing, they'll take my baby. I know they will. Please, please don't tell them. Anna stood there, her mind racing through possibilities and consequences. She should report this. Greta needed medical care, proper nutrition, someone trained to handle childbirth when the time came. Keeping this secret could be dangerous for both mother and child. But when she looked at Greta's face, at the raw terror in those dark eyes, at the protective way her hands had moved instinctively to shield her belly, Anna found herself thinking of her own mother, of her sister, of all the women she had known who had been caught in the machinery of war and crushed by circumstances beyond their control. She thought about the American medic who had bowed to her, about the breakfast that had made her cry, about the slow, confusing realization that the enemy might not be what she had been taught to believe. And she made a decision that would change everything. I won't tell, Anna said quietly, but you can't hide this forever. You're getting bigger. Soon everyone will notice. Greta's eyes filled with tears. I know, but maybe just a little longer. Just until I can figure out what to do. Just until... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Both women understood what she was asking for. Time, hope, a miracle. Anna nodded slowly. Then we'll have to be careful. Very careful. By morning, 3 more women knew the secret, not because Anna told them, but because, in the close quarters of the warehouse, privacy was an illusion. Whispered conversations carried through the thin fabric partitions. Careful movements drew attention rather than deflecting it, and women who had survived a world war had learned to notice the small details that others might miss. Frau Hildegard Weber was the first to approach Anna. She was 42 years old, a veteran nurse who had worked in field hospitals from Poland to Italy. She had steady hands, a practical mind, and the kind of calm authority that came from delivering babies in bunkers while artillery shells fell overhead. She cornered Anna in the washroom after breakfast, her expression serious. The new girl, Muller, she's pregnant. It wasn't a question. Anna considered denying it, then realized how pointless that would be. She nodded once. How far along? 6 or 7 months. Weber's jaw tightened. Does the American medic know? Not yet. Good. Keep it that way. Weber paused, thinking. She's too thin. She needs more food, better nutrition. And when the time comes, she'll need help. Real help. Anna looked at the older woman carefully. Are you offering? Weber met her gaze steadily. I've delivered 17 babies under combat conditions. I can help her, but we'll need supplies, privacy, and luck. Before Anna could respond, 2 more women entered the washroom. Liesel Braun, 19 years old, who had worked in communications and still had a spark of optimism that war hadn't quite extinguished. And Margaret Hoffman, 35, a former secretary who had a sharp tongue and an even sharper mind. Both women had clearly been listening outside the door. We want to help, Liesel said simply. Margaret crossed her arms. If the Americans find out, they'll separate her from the child. Or worse. We've all heard the stories about what happens to illegitimate babies born to enemy women. Anna wasn't sure those stories were true, but she understood the fear behind them. Uncertainty bred terrible assumptions. And in a prison camp far from home, with no way to verify anything, assumptions became reality. So we keep her secret, Margaret continued. All of us. We protect her. Weber nodded. We'll need a plan, food distribution, work assignments, ways to hide her condition as long as possible. And when she gives birth, Liesel asked quietly. Weber's expression hardened. Then we'll deal with that when it comes. Over the next 3 hours, the four women organized themselves into a conspiracy. They brought Ingrid Werner and Clara Hartmann into the circle. 6 women total bound together by a shared secret and a determination to protect one of their own. Clara, who worked in the kitchen, would make sure Greta received extra portions. Just a spoonful here, a piece of bread there. Nothing obvious, nothing that would draw attention. Weber would monitor Greta's health as best she could without proper medical equipment. She would teach the others what to watch for. Warning signs, complications. Anna and Margaret would run interference. They would position themselves between Greta and the American guards whenever possible. They would answer questions, provide excuses, create diversions if necessary. And Liesel, with her quick mind and innocent face, would be their lookout. She would learn the guards' routines. She would know when the rounds happened, when the medic made his visits, when it was safe to move, and when they needed to be invisible. Greta learned about the plan that evening. She sat on her mattress surrounded by the 6 women who had decided to stake their own safety on protecting her, and listened as they explained what they would do. When they finished, she couldn't speak. She could only nod, tears streaming down her face, one hand pressed protectively over the child that was growing larger every day. For 3 months, the conspiracy held. Through October and November, as the Texas heat finally began to ease into something resembling autumn. Through the daily routines of camp life, roll call, work assignments, meals, medical checks. Greta grew rounder, but the loose shirts and strategic positioning mostly kept her secret safe. The food Clara smuggled to her helped color returning to her cheeks and strength to her movements. Weber checked on her regularly, using the pretense of casual conversation to assess how the pregnancy was progressing. Everything was fine. The baby was healthy. Greta was managing. Until Sergeant Thomas Mitchell began to notice something was wrong. Tom made his rounds through the camp every day, checking on the health and welfare of the prisoners. It was routine work, mostly uneventful. The women were generally healthy. The camp was clean. The command wanted it that way. No one wanted an outbreak of disease or a scandal that would make headlines back home. But Tom had learned to read people during his time in the war. He had learned to notice the small signs that something wasn't quite right. The way a soldier would hold himself when hiding an injury. The subtle shifts in group dynamics that signaled hidden problems. And he noticed that the German women were protecting someone. It was obvious once he started paying attention. The way certain women always seemed to cluster around the young one with brown hair. How they would position themselves between her and any American who came too close. The careful way they distributed food during meals, passing items across the table when they thought no one was watching. Tom said nothing, he simply observed. And slowly, piece by piece, he began to understand what they were hiding. The realization hit him fully one afternoon in mid-November. He was walking past the warehouse when he saw the young woman Greta, according to his records, standing in profile near one of the windows. The late afternoon sun was behind her, throwing her silhouette into sharp relief against the concrete wall. And in that light, there was no mistaking the curve of her belly. Tom stopped walking. He stood there in the Texas dust, clipboard forgotten in his hands, and felt something twist in his chest. She was pregnant. God knew how far along. And she was terrified that the Americans would find out. He thought about the rules, the regulations, what he was supposed to do when he discovered something like this. Report it to Captain Richardson. Let the command structure handle it. Follow protocol. But then he thought about Bastogne. December 1944, the coldest winter anyone could remember. The Battle of the Bulge raging around them. Tom had been working in a field hospital trying to save lives while German artillery pounded their positions day and night. One afternoon, they brought in a German soldier, young, maybe 19, with a gut wound that was slowly killing him. There was nothing Tom could do. The damage was too extensive. The bleeding wouldn't stop. Tom sat with him anyway, held his hand, tried to make the last hour less terrifying. The soldier spoke enough English to communicate. Between gasps of pain, he pulled a photograph from his pocket. A woman and a baby, his wife and son, he explained. In Cologne. Could Tom promise to tell them that he loved them? Could he promise that someone would let them know Tom promised? He held that young soldier's hand while he died, looking at the photograph of a family that would never see him again. And something fundamental shifted in Tom's understanding of who the enemy really was. They weren't monsters. They were men. Just men. With families and hopes and fears exactly like his own. He had carried that photograph in his pocket ever since. A reminder. A promise. A pledge that he would never forget the humanity on the other side. Now standing in the fading Texas light, watching a terrified pregnant woman try to make herself invisible, Tom knew exactly what he had to do. He would keep her secret, for now, but he would also find a way to help her, because that was what medics did. They saved lives. Lives, even when it was complicated, even when the regulations said otherwise. Tom Mitchell turned away from the warehouse window and walked back toward the medical building, his mind already working through possibilities. He would need to move carefully, quietly. He would need to earn their trust before they would accept his help. But he would do it. He had made that promise to a dying German soldier in Bastogne, and he intended to keep it. Inside the warehouse, Anna stood at the window where she had been watching the American medic. She had seen him stop, seen him stare at Greta's silhouette, seen the moment of realization cross his face. Her heart was pounding. He knew. The medic knew. Everything they had worked for, everything they had risked was about to unravel. She turned to find Greta and saw that the younger woman had already noticed. Her face was white, her hand pressed against her belly in that instinctive protective gesture. "He saw me," Greta whispered. Anna nodded. "Yes. What do we do?" Anna looked back out the window at the medic's retreating figure. She thought about the bow, the kindness, the way he moved slowly and asked permission before touching anyone during examinations. "We wait," Anna said finally. "We wait and see what he does, because what else could they do? Run, there was nowhere to go. Fight, they were prisoners surrounded by armed guards. All they could do was wait and hope that the American medic with the tired eyes was the man he seemed to be, rather than the monster they had been taught to fear. That night, Greta Muller lay on her thin mattress in a converted warehouse in Texas, one hand on her swollen belly, and prayed for a miracle she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. The baby moved inside her, a gentle flutter of life. And somewhere across the compound, Sergeant Thomas Mitchell sat in his quarters thinking about promises and photographs and the thin line between following orders and doing what was right. Tomorrow would bring answers, for better or worse. But tonight in the darkness, there was only waiting and hope and the fragile, terrifying possibility that kindness might triumph over fear. Morning came too quickly. Greta barely slept. She lay awake through the long Texas night, listening to the sound of 200 women breathing in the darkness and feeling her baby shift and turn inside her. Every footstep that echoed past the warehouse made her tense. Every voice raised in the distance made her wonder if this was the moment they would come for her. But dawn arrived without incident. The wake-up bell rang at 6 o'clock. The women rose from their mattresses, dressed in the pre-dawn dimness, and filed toward the washrooms to prepare for another day of uncertain captivity. Anna found Greta standing at the sink, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. The younger woman's face was drawn shadows, dark beneath her eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" Anna asked quietly in German. Greta shook her head. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them taking my baby away." Anna placed a hand on Greta's shoulder. "We don't know what he'll do. Maybe nothing. Maybe he didn't see what we think he saw." But they both knew that was a lie the American medic had seen. And today they would learn what that knowledge would cost them. Breakfast passed in tense silence. The women ate their eggs and bacon, mechanically tasting nothing. Greta sat at the center of their protective circle, surrounded by Anna and Weber and the others. They spoke of inconsequential things, maintaining the appearance of normalcy, but their eyes constantly tracked the movements of the guards and staff around the mess hall. Sergeant Mitchell didn't appear. The absence was almost worse than his presence would have been. Where was he? What was he doing? Had he already reported to his commanding officer? Were they preparing right now to separate Greta from the group, to put her somewhere isolated, where the truth could no longer be hidden? The morning work assignments were distributed at 8 o'clock. Greta was assigned to kitchen duty, washing dishes in the back, where she would be less visible. Anna drew laundry detail. Weber went to the infirmary to help organize medical supplies under American supervision. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. And then just before noon, Anna heard her name calls. Schmidt, Anna Schmidt, report to the medical building. Every head in the laundry room turned toward her. Anna felt her heart drop into her stomach. This was it. The medic wanted to see her. Alone. She set down the sheet she had been folding and walked out into the bright Texas sunshine, her legs feeling strangely disconnected from her body. The medical building was a low structure at the far end of the compound, painted white with a red cross on the door. It looked innocuous, harmless. Anna had never been more frightened in her life. She knocked on the door frame. A voice from inside called out something in English. Anna stepped through the doorway into the cool interior. Sergeant Mitchell stood beside the examination table, his hands empty, his posture non-threatening. He looked tired, as if he too had spent the night without sleep. When he saw Anna, he gestured to a chair. Sit, please. The word please was in German. Rough, heavily accented, but unmistakable. Anna sat. Her back was rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She waited for the accusation, the anger, the threat of what would happen now that he knew their secret. Instead, Tom pulled over a second chair and sat down facing her. Not behind his desk in a position of authority, but at her level, eye to eye. He spoke slowly, clearly mixing German words into his English whenever he knew them. His accent was terrible, but Anna understood the effort he was making. The respect implicit in attempting her language rather than forcing her to struggle with his. I know about Greta. How far along is she? Anna's throat closed. She wanted to deny it to protect the secret just a little longer, but what was the point he had seen? He knew. 6 months, she said quietly. Maybe 7. We're not certain. Tom nodded as if he had expected that answer. And the father killed Normandy last year. Tom's expression softened. I'm sorry. The sympathy in his voice was so unexpected that Anna felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of the enemy. She would not show that weakness. Please, she said, and her voice cracked on the word. Please don't take her baby. She's so afraid. We're all afraid. We know what you must think of us, but the baby is innocent. Please. Tom leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his face earnest. Anna, listen to me. I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm not here to take anyone's child. I'm a medic. My job is to help people, to save lives. Do you understand? Anna stared at him, trying to process the words. Not to punish, not to take, to help. But why, she whispered. We are your enemies. Tom was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. I was at Bastogne, December 1944. Do you know it? Anna nodded. Everyone knew about Bastogne. The battle that had nearly broken the American advance. We had a field hospital there. Tom continued. One day they brought in a German soldier. He was dying. Nothing I could do, but I sat with him, held his hand. He showed me a picture of his wife and baby son, asked me to tell them he loved them. Tom reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. He held it so Anna could see. A young woman with dark hair smiling at the camera. A baby in her arms, maybe 6 months old, with wide eyes and chubby cheeks. He died holding this picture, Tom said. And I realized something. He wasn't my enemy. He was just a man, a husband, a father, just like the American soldiers I was treating, just like me. He carefully tucked the photograph back into his pocket. The war is over, Anna. We won. You lost. But that baby Greta is carrying didn't fight anyone. That baby is innocent, and I'll be damned if I let anything happen to either of them just because of rules and regulations. Anna felt something break open inside her chest. The fear she had been carrying for weeks, the tension that had wound tighter and tighter until she thought she might snap, suddenly released all at once. The tears she had been fighting came flooding out. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. Tom didn't touch her. He simply sat there waiting patiently until the storm passed. When Anna finally looked up, her face wet and her eyes red, Tom handed her a clean handkerchief. I need to help her, he said gently. Birth is dangerous without a doctor, without proper supplies. I can prepare. I can make sure she and the baby have everything they need when the time comes. But I need you to trust me. Trust. The word hung in the air between them. Trust the enemy. Trust the people who had destroyed her country. Trust the soldier sitting across from her with kind eyes and a dead German's photograph in his pocket. Anna wiped her face with the handkerchief. She thought about Greta alone and terrified. She thought about the baby who would be born into this strange, uncertain world. She thought about the medic who bowed to show respect. She took a breath and made the leap. "We trust you," she said, "but only you. No one else can know. Not yet." Tom nodded. "Understood. This stays between us until we have no other choice." Anna stood. Her legs felt shaky, but she managed to stay upright. "Thank you," she said in English. The words felt foreign in her mouth, but she meant them with everything she had. Tom stood as well. "Bitte schön," he replied with a terrible accent that almost made Anna smile despite everything. She walked out of the medical building into the brilliant sunshine, feeling like the world had somehow shifted on its axis. The enemy had become an ally. The monster had revealed himself to be a man. Nothing made sense anymore. But for the first time in months, Anna felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. That evening, Anna gathered the others in a quiet corner of the warehouse. Greta Weber, Liesel, Margareta, Ingrid, and Clara. They formed a tight circle, speaking in whispers that wouldn't carry to the other prisoners. "He knows," Anna said without preamble. "The American medic. He saw Greta. He knows everything." The reaction was immediate. Margaret tensed her face, going hard. Liesel gasped softly. Weber's jaw tightened. "What did he say?" Weber demanded. Anna looked at each of them in turn. "He said he wants to help." The silence that followed was heavy with disbelief. "Help?" Margaret's voice was sharp with skepticism. "Why would he help?" "What does he want?" Anna shook her head. "Nothing. He wants nothing. He just—" She paused, searching for the right words. "He said his job is to save lives, all lives." She told them about Bastonia, about the photograph, about Tom's promise to treat Greta and her baby with the same care he would give anyone else. When she finished, no one spoke for a long moment. Finally, Greta broke the silence. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I believe him." Every eye turned toward her. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling the baby move inside her. "I'm tired of being afraid," she continued. "I'm tired of running and hiding. If he says he'll help, then I choose to believe him. Because what other choice do I have?" Weber studied Greta's face, then nodded slowly. "We'll need to coordinate. I'll work with him. Make sure we have everything ready when the time comes." "And if it's a trap?" Margaret asked. "If he's lying?" "Then we're no worse off than we already are," Anna said. "But I don't think he's lying." I think she hesitated, then pushed forward. "I think maybe the propaganda was wrong about more than we realized." Over the next 2 weeks, an unlikely partnership formed. Tom began bringing supplies to the warehouse. Vitamins hidden in his medical bag, extra food smuggled from the officer's mess, a prenatal care manual in German that he had somehow acquired from the base library. He worked with Weber, teaching her what to expect, what to prepare for. The two of them communicated in a mixture of German, English, and medical terminology that transcended language barriers. Weber had delivered babies in worse conditions, but never with this level of support. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Tom also began leaving things in places where the women would find them. A jar of pickles in the kitchen storage room, extra blankets folded on a shelf in the laundry, small luxuries that made daily life in the camp just a little more bearable. He never asked for acknowledgement, never sought gratitude. He simply did what he could quietly and without fanfare. Greta began to relax just slightly. The constant terror that had gripped her for months eased into something more manageable. She still worried, still wondered what would happen after the baby came, but the immediate fear of discovery had lifted. She even smiled sometimes. Small, cautious smiles that reminded Anna of who Greta might have been before the war had stolen everything from her. But the peace was fragile, and it shattered on a cold morning in late November. Captain Richardson announced a camp inspection. The news came down through the chain of command like a thunderbolt. 2 days' notice. Every building would be searched, every prisoner accounted for. The camp had to be ready for a visiting officer from headquarters who was conducting surprise evaluations of POW facilities across the Southwest. The women gathered in small groups, whispering anxiously. Inspections meant scrutiny, questions, close examination of anything out of the ordinary. And Greta, now 7 months pregnant, was very much out of the ordinary. "We need a plan," Weber said that evening. "The inspection is in 2 days. We can't hide her, not if they're doing a full count and examination." "Could we say she's sick?" Liesel suggested. "Keep her in bed away from the inspectors." They'll want to see the sick prisoners too, Margaret countered, especially if they're checking medical protocols. Ingrid spoke up quietly. What if we create a distraction? Something that draws attention away from her. Anna shook her head. Too risky. If we get caught causing trouble, they'll punish all of us, and the scrutiny will only get worse. They went around in circles, each suggestion more desperate than the last. Nothing would work. There was no way to hide a 7-month pregnancy during a formal military inspection. Finally, Greta stood up. Her voice was calm, almost eerily so. I'll tell them, she said. When they find out, I'll just tell them the truth. Maybe they'll be kind, or maybe they won't. But I'm done hiding. No, Anna said immediately. Greta, you don't know what they'll do. And you don't know that they'll do anything terrible, Greta replied. The American medic has been kind. Maybe the others will be too. Weber put a hand on Greta's shoulder. Let's not make any decisions tonight. We still have 2 days. Let's see what Sergeant Mitchell says. But they never got the chance to ask him. The next morning during breakfast, Frau Weber collapsed. One moment she was standing at the serving line, the next she was on the floor, her body convulsing. Women screamed, guards shouted. Within seconds, the mess hall had erupted into chaos. Tom was there in under a minute, pushing through the crowd. He dropped to his knees beside Weber, checking her pulse, her breathing, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Anna watched from across the room, and in that moment of confusion and panic, she saw something in Weber's eyes. Just a flicker. A moment of perfect clarity and control before the older woman let her body go limp again. Weber wasn't having a seizure. She was faking it, creating a distraction. Tom called for a stretcher. 2 guards lifted Weber carefully and carried her toward the medical building. Captain Richardson, who had been observing breakfast as part of his pre-inspection routine, followed behind, barking orders. The inspection was postponed, indefinitely. The captain needed to file a medical incident report before any visiting officer arrived, needed to ensure that the camp's health protocols were being properly followed. The last thing he wanted was for a prisoner to have a medical emergency during an official inspection. It would take at least a week to reschedule. Later that afternoon, when Tom brought Weber back to the warehouse, she was pale but steady on her feet. The moment they were alone, Anna grabbed the older woman's arm. You faked it. Weber's expression was unreadable. I have no idea what you're talking about. I simply had a dizzy spell. The heat, you know. Very sudden. Anna stared at her, then slowly began to smile. You faked a seizure to delay the inspection. Weber didn't confirm or deny it. She simply adjusted her shirt and walked toward her bunk. We have a week now, maybe more. Enough time to figure something out. Tom appeared in the doorway. He looked directly at Weber, and something passed between them. Understanding, respect. The acknowledgement of 2 people who had both done whatever necessary to protect someone in their care. Thank you, Frau Weber, he said in careful German. That was very brave. Weber met his eyes. I told you, I was simply dizzy. But her small smile said everything that her words didn't. That night, Tom returned to the warehouse after dark. He found Anna sitting outside on the steps looking up at the vast Texas sky. The stars were brilliant out here, away from city lights. More stars than she had ever seen in her life. Tom sat down beside her, maintaining a careful distance. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Anna broke the silence. Why are you really doing this? Not the story about Bastonia. The real reason? Tom was quiet. Then he said, my sister, Sarah, back in Ohio. She got pregnant when she was 17. Her boyfriend ran off the day she told him. My parents wanted to send her away, to one of those homes where they take the babies. Anna waited, sensing there was more. I wouldn't let them, Maureen continued. I fought with my father for weeks. Eventually, I told them that if they sent Sarah away, they'd lose me too. His voice was soft. She kept the baby. My nephew. He's 4 years old now, and he's the best thing that ever happened to our family. Tom looked at Anna. Sarah was afraid, alone. She needed someone to stand with her when everyone else turned away. I did that for my sister. Now I'm doing it for Greta, because every woman deserves someone in her corner when she's carrying a child. Every woman deserves kindness. Anna felt tears welling up again. She seemed to cry so easily these days, as if the war had worn away whatever protective shell she had built around her emotions. You're a good man, Thomas Mitchell. Tom smiled slightly. I'm just a medic trying to keep a promise. They sat together in the darkness, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. Somewhere inside the warehouse, Greta was sleeping, one hand resting on her belly. The baby inside her, unaware of the complicated world waiting outside, kicked and turned in the warmth of the womb. In 2 days, Weber would be cleared by medical examination and declared fit for duty. The inspection would be rescheduled for the following week. But by then, Tom would have submitted a detailed medical report recommending that pregnant prisoners be exempted from standard inspections to avoid stress-related complications. Captain Richardson would approve the recommendation without really reading it, too busy with paperwork to notice the implications. And Greta would remain safe. For now, but November was sliding into December. The baby was growing larger. Time was running out, and everyone knew it. Soon, very soon, they would face a crisis that no amount of planning or protection could prevent. The baby would come, and when it did, everything would change. Anna looked at the man sitting beside her on the steps. The enemy who had become a friend. The soldier who had chosen compassion over regulations. "Thank you," she said again, meaning it more deeply than she ever had before. Tom nodded. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start preparing for what's coming next." Anna stood brushing dust from her uniform. Before she went inside, she turned back. "Tom." "Yeah, that photograph, the German soldier. Did you ever find his family? Did you tell them?" Tom's expression grew distant. "I tried. After the war ended. I wrote to the address he gave me. The letter came back. No such address. The whole neighborhood had been destroyed by bombs." Anna felt her heart contract. "I'm sorry." Tom looked up at her. "Me too. That's why this matters so much. That soldier asked me to tell his family he loved them. I couldn't keep that promise. But I can keep this one. I can make sure Greta and her baby survive. That has to be enough." Anna nodded and went inside. Behind her, Tom sat alone under the stars, one hand resting on the pocket that held a photograph of a woman and baby he would never find. A promise he couldn't keep haunting him across continents and years. But this promise, the one he had made to a terrified German woman in a Texas prisoner of war camp, this one he would keep, no matter what it cost. The stars wheeled overhead. The desert wind whispered through the scrubland. And inside the converted warehouse, 200 women slept the uneasy sleep of those who live in the space between war and peace, never quite certain which world they belong to anymore. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, new tests of the fragile trust they had built. But tonight there was rest. There was hope. And there was the quiet promise of a man who had decided that kindness mattered more than regulations, that humanity transcended uniforms and flags, and the arbitrary lines that divided people into friends and enemies. In the darkness, Greta's baby kicked again. A strong, healthy kick that promised life continuing despite everything. And that, in the end, was all that truly mattered. December came to West Texas with a cold that surprised everyone. The locals said it was the worst winter in 20 years. Temperatures that rarely dipped below 50 in the daytime now struggled to reach 40. At night, frost appeared on the warehouse windows, delicate patterns of ice that reminded the German women of home. Greta was 8 months pregnant now. There was no hiding it anymore, but somehow it didn't matter. The camp had settled into a rhythm where the truth existed in plain sight but remained unspoken. The guards saw but didn't report. The other prisoners knew but said nothing. It was as if everyone had collectively decided that some things were more important than regulations. Captain Richardson knew, of course. Tom had finally told him in late November, framing it as a medical situation that required his attention. The captain had listened to Tom's careful explanation, looked at the paperwork Tom had prepared, and made a decision that surprised them both. "Handle it quietly," Richardson had said. "Make sure she gets proper care. But I don't want this becoming a situation." "Understood, yes, sir." Richardson had paused at the door of his office, his hand on the frame. "My wife," he had said softly, "we lost a baby last year. 7 months. Stillborn." Tom had waited, sensing there was more. "I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone," Richardson continued. "Not even the enemy. So you do what you need to do, Sergeant. You make sure that woman and her child survive. That's an order." Tom had saluted, not trusting himself to speak. Now, 2 weeks later, Tom was preparing for what he knew would come soon. He had converted a small storage room adjacent to the medical building into a makeshift delivery room. He had sterilized equipment, assembled supplies, gone over Weber's experience, and his own limited obstetric training until he felt as prepared as possible for something he had never actually done before. He had delivered exactly 0 babies in his career as a medic, but he would do this. He had to. On December 11th at 3 in the morning, Anna woke to the sound of someone crying out. She sat up immediately, her heart already racing. In the darkness of the warehouse, she heard movement, urgent whispers, the sound of feet hitting concrete. Anna, someone hissed. It's time. She was up and moving before her mind fully caught up with what was happening. She found Greta sitting on the edge of her mattress with both hands pressed to her belly, her face twisted with pain. My water broke, Greta gasped. An hour ago, I didn't want to wake anyone, but the contractions, they're getting stronger. Weber was already there kneeling beside Greta, timing the contractions with a watch Tom had given her. Every 8 minutes, strong and regular. This baby is coming today. Liesel ran to wake the guard and request Sergeant Mitchell. Margaret and Ingrid helped Greta to her feet, supporting her as another contraction hit. Clara gathered the supplies. They had been hoarding clean sheets and towels and everything they might need. Anna stood for a moment watching the organized chaos, feeling the weight of what was about to happen settle over her like a physical thing. This was real. After months of planning and protecting and worrying, the moment had finally arrived. Tom appeared within 10 minutes, still buttoning his uniform shirt, his medical bag in hand. He took one look at Greta's face and nodded. Let's go to the clinic. We're ready for you. The walk across the compound seemed to take forever. Greta moved slowly, pausing every few minutes as contractions seized her body. Weber and Anna supported her on either side. Tom walked ahead, unlocking doors and turning on lights. The small delivery room was warm, heated by a portable heater Tom had requisitioned. The examination table was covered in clean white sheets. Medical equipment was laid out on trays. Everything looked sterile and professional and completely surreal. Tom helped Greta onto the table. Weber took up position beside her, holding Greta's hand. Anna stood at the foot of the table, feeling useless and terrified and desperately hoping that everything would be okay. The contractions came faster now. Every 5 minutes, every 3, time seemed to compress and stretch in strange ways. Minutes felt like hours. Hours passed in what seemed like seconds. Tom examined Greta and found her fully dilated. You're doing great, he said in his terrible German. Baby comes soon, but soon turned out to be relative. The labor stretched through the morning and into the afternoon. Greta's strength began to flag. She was exhausted, drenched in sweat despite the cool temperature, crying out with each contraction that racked her body. Weber whispered encouragement in German, her voice steady and calm, even as her eyes showed concern. This was taking too long. Something wasn't quite right. Tom checked again and felt his stomach drop. The baby was positioned wrong. Not breech, thank God, but turned slightly sideways. The head wasn't engaging properly. Unless the baby turned, this could become dangerous very quickly. I need to try to reposition, he told Weber in a low voice. It's going to hurt. Weber translated for Greta. The young woman nodded weakly, past the point of caring about pain. She just wanted this to be over. Wanted to hold her baby and know that everything would be okay. Tom worked carefully, his hands gentle but firm, trying to manipulate the baby into a better position. Greta screamed, a sound of such raw agony that Anna had to turn away, tears streaming down her face. But it worked. Tom felt the baby shift, the head dropping into the birth canal properly. Relief flooded through him. Okay, he said. Okay, next contraction, you push. Hard as you can. The next hour was a blur of pushing and resting and pushing again. Greta was beyond exhaustion, now running on nothing but stubborn determination and the primal need to bring her child into the world. Weber held Greta's hands so tightly that both their knuckles were white. Anna stood frozen at the foot of the table, watching everything unfold with a mixture of horror and awe. And Tom, despite his fear and his lack of experience, felt himself slipping into a state of focused calm. This was what he had trained for. Not this exactly, but the essence of it. Saving lives. Bringing hope into impossible situations. Being steady when everyone else was falling apart. I see the head, he said. One more push, Greta. One more and you'll meet your baby. Greta gathered everything she had left. Every ounce of strength, every bit of courage. She pushed with a sound that was half scream, half sob. And the baby came. Into Tom's waiting hands, slippery and small and absolutely perfect. A girl. tiny but healthy with a full head of dark hair and lungs that worked beautifully based on the wail that filled the room. Tom cleared the baby's airway, cut the cord with steady hands, and lifted the infant onto Greta's chest. "It's a girl," he said unnecessarily because Greta could feel the warm weight of her daughter against her skin. Greta wrapped her arms around her baby and began to sob. Not tears of pain or fear, but of overwhelming relief and joy and love, so fierce it seemed to fill the entire room. "Hello," she whispered in German. "Hello, my little one. I'm your mother. You're safe. You're finally safe." The baby stopped crying at the sound of Greta's voice, her tiny eyes trying to focus on the face above her. One small hand reached up, fingers spreading and closing reflexively. Weber was crying openly now, her professional composure completely shattered. Anna had sunk into a chair, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. And Tom stood there with his hands still bloody from the delivery, watching this moment of pure love and connection, and felt something shift inside his chest. This was why he had become a medic. Not for the glory or the medals. For this. For moments when life triumphed over death, when hope proved stronger than fear. Outside the delivery room, the other women had gathered. Liesel and Marguerite and Ingrid and Clara and a dozen others who had heard what was happening and come to wait. When Tom opened the door and gave them a thumbs up, the hallway erupted in cheers and laughter and tears. A baby had been born in a prisoner of war camp in West Texas, against all odds, against regulations and fear and the weight of history, and she was perfect. The next few days passed in a haze of exhaustion and wonder. Greta remained in the medical building, recovering in a small room that Tom had set up for her. The baby, who Greta had named Sarah Anna after Tom's sister and her protector, slept in a makeshift crib that one of the American guards had built from scrap wood. Tom checked on them multiple times a day, monitoring Greta's recovery and making sure the baby was feeding properly. Weber practically lived in the room, unable to stay away, her maternal instincts fully engaged after delivering so many babies over the years. Anna visited every chance she got, sitting beside Greta's bed and holding Sarah Anna with trembling hands, marveling at how something so small could be so perfect. The other prisoners found excuses to walk past the medical building, hoping for a glimpse of the baby. Tom pretended not to notice when women lingered outside the window, smiling at the sight of Greta nursing her daughter. Even Captain Richardson came by, awkward and uncomfortable, but determined to see the child whose existence had bent so many rules. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching Greta cradle Sarah Anna, and something in his expression softened. "She's beautiful," he said quietly. "Congratulations." "Thank you, sir," Greta replied in careful English words Anna had taught her. Richardson cleared his throat. "I've arranged for additional rations for nursing mothers." And he paused. "When you're ready to return to the general population, we'll make sure you have privacy, a corner area with curtains." "For the baby." Greta's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Richardson nodded stiffly and left his duty done. His own grief over his lost child eased just slightly by the knowledge that this one had survived. 3 days after the birth, Tom arrived at the medical building, carrying a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. He found Greta sitting up in bed, Sarah Anna sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I have something for you," Tom said. He held out the package. Greta shifted the baby carefully and took the package with one hand. She pulled at the string until it loosened, then folded back the paper. Inside was a small, stuffed bear. It was old, clearly well-loved, with patches on its weapons and one eye that had been sewn back on at some point. But it was clean and soft and perfect. "This was my sister Sarah's," Tom explained. "She sent it from Ohio, said every baby needs a friend." Greta looked at the bear, then at Tom, then back at the bear. The tears came again, as they seemed to do at the slightest provocation these days. "Your sister sent this for my baby." Tom nodded. "I wrote to her, told her about you, about what happened. She wanted to help." Greta held the bear against her chest right next to Sarah Anna. "Tell her thank you. Tell her," Greta's voice broke. "Tell her I will never forget this kindness." That evening, the women gathered in the warehouse for what had become an unofficial celebration. Someone had saved extra bread from dinner. Clara had somehow acquired sugar and had made a simple cake. There was no alcohol, but someone produced a bottle of apple juice that they shared like champagne. Tom was invited, the first time an American had ever been welcomed into the women's private space. He sat awkwardly on a crate, while the German women sang songs in their language songs about mothers and babies and hope. Weber translated one of them for him. It's a lullaby, very old, about a mother watching over her child while the stars watch over them both. Tom listened to the melody haunting and beautiful and thought about his own mother singing to him when he was small, about his sister Sarah singing to her son, about the universal language of mothers loving their children, a language that transcended nations and wars, and all the stupid reasons people found to hurt each other. When the singing ended, Greta stood. She was still weak, moving carefully, but she wanted to say something. Anna stood beside her, ready to catch her if she faltered. I want to thank everyone, Greta said in German, and Anna quietly translated into English for Tom. You all protected me when I was most afraid. You shared your food. You stood between me and danger. You gave me the courage to hope that my daughter could be born safe. She turned to Tom. And you, Sergeant Mitchell, you kept your promise. You helped me bring Sarah Anna into the world. I will tell her about you when she's old enough to understand. I will make sure she knows that there was an American soldier who chose kindness over rules, who chose life over war. Tom didn't trust himself to speak. He simply nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. The winter deepened. Christmas came and went, celebrated quietly in the camp with a service led by a chaplain and a special meal that almost felt festive. Greta was back in the warehouse now, her corners sectioned off with sheets all hung from wires, creating a small private space for her and Sarah Anna. The baby thrived. She gained weight steadily, her tiny features becoming more defined each day. She had Greta's dark hair and what looked like it might be her father's blue eyes, though it was still too early to tell for certain. The other prisoners doted on her shamelessly. Women who had lost everything, who had been separated from their own families and children, found solace in caring for this one small life. They took turns holding her, singing to her, making toys from scraps of fabric and wood. Anna became Sarah Anna's unofficial godmother. She spent hours sitting with Greta, watching the baby sleep, talking about the future in cautious, hopeful terms. What will you do when the war is truly over? Anna asked one afternoon. When they send us home. Greta was quiet for a long moment, stroking her daughter's soft hair. I'll find my mother if she's still alive. If Hamburg still exists, I'll introduce her to her granddaughter. And maybe Greta's voice grew soft. Maybe she'll forgive me for not being married. Maybe she'll love Sarah Anna anyway. She will, Anna said with certainty. How could anyone not love this child? What about you? Greta asked. Will you go back to Munich? Anna shook her head slowly. There's nothing left for me there. My parents are dead. My sister too. The apartment building was destroyed in the bombing. I've been thinking, she hesitated, maybe I'll stay here. In America, if they'll let me. Greta looked at her friend in surprise. Really? Anna nodded. Tom said he would help. His sister Sarah lives in Ohio. She needs help with her son. She offered. Anna's cheeks colored slightly. She offered to sponsor me. To help me get a visa. Anna, that's wonderful. Greta reached out and squeezed Anna's hand. You deserve a fresh start. You deserve to be happy. So do you. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching Sarah Anna sleep, both of them contemplating futures that were still uncertain but no longer quite so frightening. January became February. The cold began to ease. The camp routine continued, but something had fundamentally changed. The women were no longer just prisoners. They were people. Individuals with stories and hopes and futures that extended beyond the wire fences of Fort Stockton. Tom continued his rounds, but now he stopped to play with Sarah Anna, making faces that made the baby laugh, a sound of pure joy that never failed to make everyone in the warehouse smile. He also spent more time with Anna. They would sit outside in the evenings when weather permitted, talking about everything and nothing, about their families, their hopes, the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. One evening in late February, as they sat watching the sun set over the distant mountains, Tom cleared his throat nervously. Anna, I've been thinking about after, when the camp closes, when everyone goes home. Anna waited, her heart beating faster. I'd like to write to you, if you're willing. He paused. I'd like to keep knowing you. Anna felt warmth spread through her chest. I would like that too. Tom smiled, relieved. Good, that's good. They sat in silence for a moment longer, then Anna said quietly, Thomas, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think about him, the German soldier from Bastogne? Tom nodded slowly. Every day. I still carry his photograph. Still wish I could have told his family what happened. Anna reached out and placed her hand over his. You kept your promise to him in a different way. You helped Greta. You helped all of us. Maybe that's what he would have wanted. For you to help other Germans. Other families. Tom looked at their joined hands, then at Anna's face. Maybe you're right. I know I'm right. They sat together as the stars began to appear. Two people from opposite sides of a war that was finally ending, discovering that the things that connected humans were stronger than the forces that tried to tear them apart. In March, the official word came down. The camp at Fort Stockton would close in May. Prisoners would be processed for repatriation to Germany. Those who wanted to apply for immigration status in the United States could do so through proper channels. The announcement brought mixed emotions, relief at the prospect of going home, fear about what home might look like after years of war, hope for those who were choosing to stay. Greta decided to return to Germany. She needed to find her mother, needed to try to rebuild some connection to the life she had known before. Anna chose to stay. Tom's sister Sarah had officially offered sponsorship. The paperwork was being processed. By summer, Anna would be living in Cleveland, Ohio, helping care for a 4-year-old boy and learning what it meant to be American. The night before Greta left, the women gathered one last time. There were tears and embraces and promises to write. Sarah Anna, now 4 months old and alert and curious about everything, was passed from woman to woman, each one saying goodbye to the baby they had all helped protect. Weber held her last, rocking her gently, singing the old lullaby one final time. When she handed Sarah Anna back to Greta, the older woman's face was wet with tears. Take care of each other, Weber said. Remember that you're loved. Tom came to say goodbye in the morning. He brought one final gift, an envelope with money inside carefully saved from his salary over the past months. For Sarah Anna, he said when Greta tried to refuse, for when she's older, for school or clothes or whatever she needs. Greta accepted the envelope with shaking hands. How can I ever repay you? Tom smiled. Just take care of her. Let her grow up happy and safe. That's all the repayment I need. He knelt down so he was at Sarah Anna's level. The baby reached out and grabbed his finger with her tiny hand holding on tight. You're going to do great things, little one, Tom said softly. Your mother is brave and strong, and she's going to make sure you have every opportunity. Don't let anyone tell you that you're less than amazing. Sarah Anna gurgled and smiled, her blue eyes bright. Tom stood and turned to Greta. If you ever need anything, if you're ever in trouble, you write to me. Promise, I promise. Greta stepped forward and hugged him, awkward but sincere. Thank you for my daughter's life. Thank you for giving us both a chance. The bus came at noon. Greta boarded with Sarah Anna in her arms and the stuffed bear tucked safely in her bag. She found a seat by the window and looked out at the women gathered to see her off. Anna stood at the front of the group crying openly. Weber beside her, stoic but with red-rimmed eyes. Tom a few feet away in his uniform, standing at attention but with his hand raised in farewell. As the bus pulled away, Greta held Sarah Anna up to the window so she could see the people who had saved them. The baby pressed her small hand against the glass, and in that moment Greta felt not sadness, but gratitude. Yes, she had lost Franz. Yes, the war had stolen so much from her, but she had gained something too. She had learned that kindness could exist in the darkest places, that enemies could become friends, that humanity was stronger than hatred. The bus carried them away from Fort Stockton toward a ship that would take them back to Germany, toward a future that was uncertain but no longer quite so terrifying. Behind them, Anna and Tom stood side by side watching until the bus disappeared into the desert heat shimmer. We did it, Anna said quietly. We kept her safe. Tom nodded. We did. They stood in silence for a moment longer. Then Tom said, I'm glad you're staying. Anna looked up at him, seeing past the uniform to the man underneath. A man who kept promises. A man who chose compassion over regulations. A man who had become, against all odds, her dearest friend. Me too, she said. The war was over. The camp would close. People would scatter across the globe, returning to lives that would never quite be the same as they were before. But this moment, this connection, this proof that kindness could transcend even the deepest divides would remain. A story to be told, a memory to be treasured, a reminder that even in the darkest times, humanity could survive. And somewhere on a bus heading east, a baby slept peacefully in her mother's arms, unaware of the miracle of her own existence, unaware of the people who had risked everything to ensure she could be born into a world where love was stronger than fear. Sarah Anna Mueller, born in a prisoner of war camp in Texas, delivered by an enemy soldier who became a guardian angel protected by women who chose courage over compliance. Her life was a promise kept, a light in the darkness, a testament to the enduring power of human compassion. And she would grow up always knowing that she was born from kindness, that even in war, even when everything seemed lost, people could choose to be good. That was the legacy. That was the truth. That was the story that would be told for generations. Because in the end, it wasn't the wars that defined us. It was the moments of grace. The choices to be kind when kindness cost something. The decision to see the humanity in the enemy. That was what mattered. That was what endured. That was what made the difference between a world consumed by hatred and a world where hope could still take root and grow. And in a small town in Germany years later, a young woman named Sarah Anna would hear her mother's story and understand. She would learn about the American medic and the German telephone operator and the conspiracy of kindness that saved her life. And she would carry that story forward, sharing it with her own children, making sure the lesson was never forgotten. Because some promises once made echo across time. Some acts of kindness ripple forward through generations. Some moments of humanity shine bright enough to light the way even decades later. This was one of those moments. This was one of those promises. This was one of those lights, and it would never fade.